Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for a live virtual weather outlook meeting. As we continue to talk a little bit and tied in with these meetings around PRF. As you can see from the display on the screen, we still have a few more days for those that are interested in the pasture rangeland and forage program. It's a government program offered through federal crop insurance, where livestock owners can manage against the risk of drought. And for many, right, it doesn't have to necessarily be a year of drought, right? It allows us to protect different intervals on our haying and grazing ground. And so as a program that we've utilized with a lot of our growers throughout the years, it's definitely something worth looking into. If you haven't yet, we'd gladly sit down with you. We can look at the historical data and look at how it can impact your operation. So as I pass this over to Brian, I just encourage you, if you have more questions around PRF, feel free to reach out to myself or the crop insurance team, and we'll turn this over to Brian to get into his portion.
All right. Thanks, Scotty. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you all so we can go ahead and get started. I assume everybody can see the producer ag slide right here at the beginning. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Let's go ahead and talk about what we've been up to over the past month or so. And the short-term composite drought indicator has made a pretty impressive turn, and for good reason, just simply because a lot of us have been so wet for the past 30 days or so. And you can see the response, especially right here over south central and southwest portions of the state. And I think that that's been a very important turn for a whole host of reasons, simply because we've been dry, through the majority of this fall until really about the past month or so. So to see this type of improvement over the south and the southwest, I know it's been great. In some cases, it's even been too wet. And I know a lot of us are, looking for a little bit of drier weather to head our way too. And we'll see what we can do about accommodating that in the short term. But these are the 30-day anomalies in terms of inches of rain. And if you wanted to start replenishing a profile, boy, you couldn't draw it up much better than this, looking at some of those totals, especially over south central and southeast Kansas, which largely got skipped on a lot of the rain that took place, even going back into the first, say, 2/3 of this year. So to see those areas really be able to capitalize on some serious moisture, it's been a great thing. And while other areas haven't been as wet as those locations, they've still done real well. Even across northwest Kansas, where it's been a little bit drier there in certain places, you still did okay. Southern parts of Nebraska have gotten into it as well. So there's been a lot of curing, if you will, in terms of that low subsoil moisture going on over the past 30 days or so. And that's been fantastic. The forecast over the next 2 weeks looks like this in terms of forecast precipitation anomalies. So as wet as the previous 30 days have been, we're going to start to dry things out a little bit. Even this little piece of energy that's coming through today and tomorrow is largely going to favor areas in Colorado in terms of mountain snow and a little bit of snow out across parts of the eastern plains, but certainly nothing significant. The play here over the next couple of weeks is to dry things out. That's especially true the farther south and southeast you go. So for those of you that are looking for some drier weather, I think you have a pretty good shot of actually getting it. Temperature-wise, some colder air coming in over the next couple of days. Now, the lion's share of that, at least the coldest of that signal, is going to favor areas farther east, eastern Kansas and points eastward into parts of the Corn Belt. As you can see right there, places over here in Missouri as well as Illinois, those areas are likely going to be between about 8 and 10 degrees below average for the next 7 days. However, after this first 7-day period, this is from December 3rd through December 10th, we're going to have a pretty good ridge of high pressure built across the western U.S., and we're going to see some warmth come back into the fray. Obviously, you can see most of Kansas going to end up being above average, with the warmest stuff being positioned out here across western and central portions of the state. So, the brush with some cooler air doesn't look like it's going to last that long. And to be honest with you, in terms of a significant tap to Arctic air, that doesn't have a real good shot of making it this far west. It's going to be shunted farther to the east, as I just showed you. If we look even farther down the road, and again, I will qualify this map right here from the European weeklies, which goes out to 46 days. All right. That if the weather pattern is initializing dry or wet, this particular model has a tendency to bias its forecast that way. So that you can see how dry these anomalies are for the next month and a half right here. Do I think that that's a little bit overdone? Not necessarily on the front end, but on the back end, it may be a little bit overdone just simply because it is initializing on the drier side of things. But the propensity for this area to dry out here, I think is pretty much spot on, at least in the near term, for the reason I showed you a second ago. And in terms of the temperature anomalies, again, it keeps most of Kansas average to above average. In terms of those anomalies, this is again through the first week and a half of January. I think probably the stoutest warm signal is going to be down here, a little bit to the south, but some of that bleeds its way. You can see up here to the north, across at least the western half of the state. All right, let's look beyond what we've just talked about and start delving into some of the longer range stuff going forward into 2025. I show you this graphic a lot because I think it's important. This is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation mode since 2020, and it has been solidly negative during that time. And the latest value over here on the far right-hand side, and I'll get an update on this here in about a week and a half, has been down to about almost -4. And to put that in perspective, we have not seen that value that low since 1950. So the significance of the PDO being negative is this right here. Since 1998, the PDO has been negative. And I've done the better part of a water year here, January to October, from 98 to 2024, where you're seeing all the yellow here. That's where we've largely been drier than average through the course of the year. And I know this isn't like significant news to most of you because you know that, but even here in the southeast part of the state, which has largely been dry for the past 3 years, at best you're doing average moisture, but right through the midsection of the country, when the PDO is negative, it has largely been drier. And for the past 3 years, okay, since 2020, these are the precipitation anomalies that have been associated with that PDO being that negative. Really, you could draw this up and say the western half of the country has largely been drier than average. But look at some of these anomalies here across Kansas for the past, 3.5, almost 4 years, really 4 years. It has largely been dry. And I know this isn't news to a lot of you, but probably some of the more significant spots that have really been uncharacteristically dry have shown up in the southeast part of the state. So the reason I bring this up is that for those of you that may be new to PRF or be thinking about what to do with PRF going forward, when the PDO has been negative, we have had some dry time in Kansas at any one particular time of the year. And I think it's important to recognize that going forward, at least into 2025, the PDO is still likely going to be negative. I mean, it is very negative right now, and I don't see any sign of it really making a big bounce back during this year. So the fact that while we've been blessed with the moisture we have been over the past 30 days, is that a forecast that we can reliably position and go forward into 2025? No, I don't think it is, because the PDO is still going to be negative. So is this the year to say, no, I'm going to put PRF on the shelf and not deal with it? Probably not, in my opinion. Okay. What we've got going on right now is a weak La Nina episode in this oval shaped area here, where you're seeing the blue. That's where the sea surface temperature anomalies are slightly cooler than average. This is not a gangbuster event at all, but in addition to that oval shaped area, we've got cool water up here in the Gulf of Alaska. We've got cool water from the Baja out toward Hawaii, and we have cool water down here. So overall, with the exception of, say, this area right here in the Western Pacific and off the coast of Japan, the Pacific Ocean is largely cooler than average. And that is not a good signal for a lot of moisture going forward into 2025. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad year. It just isn't a classic signal to produce significant wetness over the long haul. And that's kind of the point that I was making and have been making to a lot of folks that I've talked to when they've asked, say, wow, the past 30 days have been amazing. Is this going to continue? It's possible we will see storms, obviously, in 2025. But as far as an overly excessively wet pattern going into 2025, with this ocean configuration, I just simply don't see that happening right now. Coming back to the La Nina part of this, really since, back in September, we've been below negative 0.5. So we've been technically in weak La Nina territory during that time. The latest values up here is about almost a -7. And you can see the tendency here has been to weakly intensify over on the right-hand side here lately. But it really hasn't responded a great deal within the atmosphere because the signal's been so weak. So this graphic is a running average of the Southern Oscillation Index. And what this is all about is that when there is a bona fide La Nina signal, this graph will look like something over here, okay? These numbers way positive. When you have an El Nino, you get stuff that's down here that's quite negative. Recently, we have just been pretty much in neutral territory. There's been a weak push maybe over here lately to go more positive, but in terms of any significant signal with the SOI, that just simply hasn't been the case. Over the next couple of weeks, we are in a position to see this weak La Nina at least maintain itself or intensify a little bit, and it has a lot to do with the forecast of these easterly trade winds. You can see over here on the left-hand side of the graph, this started November 25th. It takes us down here to December 9th. So it's a forecast for that, and the trade winds look to persist at a pretty good clip during that period of time. So I don't see the La Nina going away with this configuration. If anything, it's probably going to intensify at least just a little bit. The latest computer model information, specifically from one of my favorites, the BOM up here, the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, just came out today with its forecast. And you can see that NOAA down here, our government model, continues to be overly aggressive, in my opinion, with this particular La Nina. This is no surprise. I've hammered NOAA's accuracy on this now for the past few months just because it hasn't been that good. But the other models have been more measured, not only the BOM, but also the ECMWF European. So those two, again, if you've been on with us here, you know that those two are my favorite as far as the forecast goes. And if we look at January, you see the BOM is right there in very, very weak La Nina territory. Anything of any significance would be over here to the left of that blue dashed line. But you still see the ECMWF and the BOM, lagging behind a little bit. NOAA is still overly aggressive, in my opinion. If we go to February's forecast here, you can see the BOM really weakens it. The ECMWF, the euro, stays pretty much status quo with where it was. NOAA's model is still over here to the left. If we go to March, everybody backs off. And in fact, the BOM actually starts to warm things up in that ocean, part of the ocean out there, which is interesting. The European is still closer back here toward neutral, at least through March. And then if we go to April, the BOM keeps its forecast of weakly warm and the euro continues to back it off. But interestingly enough, the Meteo model out of France is also over here in a similar territory as the BOM. So the significance of what I've just showed you is that, one, this La Nina event is not going to be a moderate event. It's not going to be a strong event. It is going to be a weak event, and it's also going to be a pretty short lasting event before we make some kind of pivot, I think, as we head into spring. Now, just because we don't go to full-blown El Nino during the spring, which I don't think is likely, doesn't mean that that can't have some significance. And I'm going to show that to you here in the modeling in just a little bit. But I think the good news about this is that, one, we can put the La Nina part of this to bed. The bad news part about it, as I showed you, the PDO is still likely going to be negative. So what I've done here, these are all the weak La Nina years from November to March. Okay, since 1954, and I'll bring this in a little bit closer time frame here in just a second. But during all of those years, from November to March, this is the signal that has shown up. The driest part of that signal favors central and southern, central and southwest parts of Kansas, with the more stout dry signal during those weak La Nina years. Okay, some of the more recent years, November to March. Okay. Interestingly enough, 96, 97, 99, 2000, 08, 09, 11, 12, and 22, 23. Those years are close in the cycle with where this La Nina is right now. And the interesting thing about that is that those years, for the most part, were weak, with the exception of 22, 23. But look at this. There was a signal was pretty hard to pin down, really, across anywhere north of that line. All right. And that's because during a weak La Nina, your pattern variability is greater. All right. So you get some mixed signals in there. Areas that you don't get mixed signals are down here on the southern tier and up the mid-Atlantic. That's where the stoutest dry signal is with those years. But since 2000, if we want to dial this in, there have been 11 La Nina years and 6 of them have been weak for the winter. So let's look at the first one of those, December to February 2000, 2001. All right. Eastern half, really most of Kansas for that matter, average to above average. That's what December to February of 2000, 2001 looked like. That's what December to February of 05, 06 looked like. It was the complete opposite. If we are looking at a year that is favored with those analog years, I would say that 05, 06 is doing better than 2000, 2001, December to February. Okay. Let's push it a little further here. 08, 09 was also dry winter for Kansas with a weak La Nina episode. 16, 17, eastern part of Kansas was dry. Really, the stoutest dry signal was right there. Okay, just to the east, right up in the western part of the Corn Belt. 17, 18 was dry. 22, 23 wasn't terrible December to February, but was still dry here in the southwest part of the state. So let's back up. We have 1 year that was wet, 1 year that was dry, 2 years that were dry, 1 year that was probably mixed right there, another year that was dry, and 1 year that was just kind of mid. So statistically speaking, when there is a weak La Nina present, the tip is to be drier than average for the winter. That doesn't mean that we won't have storms or that the pattern won't be variable. I'm just showing you purely what history shows us when things are stacked like this, at least for the state, if that helps. Okay. So with that in mind, let's see what the models are doing. And this was November's forecast. Okay, so this forecast came out on October 31st for the month of November. And boy, did it do a good job. All of this in the midsection of the country was forecast to be wetter than average, and it hit it very, very well. Okay, so I like to see that if the model going forward. And if we look at its December forecast, it dries things out in the west and north central part of the state. We've got a little bit of moisture here in the southeast and the south. But as I showed you, at least for the next couple of weeks, most of Kansas is probably going to end up being drier than average. So is this model onto something? I still think it's doing okay during that time for December. If we look at January, pretty good dry signal across the whole state. And for that matter, across the midsection of the country. That would be on brand with what history has shown us with weak La Nina episodes. February, kind of a mixed bag. I would say tip toward drier than average for most of the state, but not a stout signal, not crazy. And I think this kind of owes to the pattern variability that I talked about. Without a real strong La Nina signal locking the pattern up, there are going to be storms come through. There are going to be stronger cold fronts come southward from Canada with this. And then if you see, we go right back into the dry part of this forecast for the month of March across Kansas. April, kind of mixed, drier west, a little wetter east. That would also be consistent with a weak La Nina if we still have that signal by then, which I don't think we will. Okay. And then if we look at May, we see drier west, a little wetter south central and parts of the east. Okay, so still the tip toward the driest part of the region consistently. The western third of Kansas, I think, is totally on that. The farther east you get, that signal gets a little bit more mixed. That's usually the case, that really every mile you go farther east, your rain chances are better with these storm systems that come in, simply because they get organized better the farther east that they get. All right, so let's look at the NMME model here. This is its forecast for December. Has a weak dry signal across most of the state. If we go to January, just average, core of that driest signal is a little farther to the south. If we go to February, kind of the same story. If we go to March, we start to see that dry signal flex a little bit here on the western part of the state. April, still the same story. May, weakly dry, but still there. And June, it relaxes a little bit there. I would expect any La Nina signal to be gone by March at the latest. The problem with that, though, as I said, the PDO is still going to be negative. The Pacific is still going to be cold. So in that background state, it still has a historical tendency toward producing that dry signal for those areas that I've mentioned. Let's look at the IRI. This is January, February, March. Again, it has the stoutest dry signal here to the south and southwest, but still weakly dry there. You can see a little bit of yellow across the majority of Kansas, not so much the farther east you go. And if we look at March, April, May, again, driest signal is still positioned here, which does include the west and southwest part of the state. Let's look at the Climate Prediction Center's forecast. This just came out the other day. A lot of these things are blending together, okay? So it's okay. Same idea. Stoutest dry signal is in this brown area, which still encompasses southwest Kansas. March, April, May, stoutest dry signal here, right around the Four Corners. May, June, July, the biggest dry signal pivots up to the north, across the northern Rockies. And I know this is way out there. This is July, August, September, but still positions it up here to the north. Why the move? If we pivot toward a weak El Nino during sometime in the spring and summer of 25, that usually targets this area up here with the driest. Northern Rockies, Pacific Northwest, parts of the northern plains. Weak El Ninos will position the driest weather farther north. As I said, I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket just yet, but that's why this is doing what it's doing. So with that in mind, if you guys have questions, please feel free to fire away.
Yeah, Brian, one of the questions I got text is, so even if the La Nina switches in March, the PDO is a predominant dry signal?
Historically, I mean, those graphics that I showed you go back a quarter century. And the fact that the PDO has been this negative since 2020, I mean, I can go back and show you that graphic right now. It's a very, this is the precipitation anomalies, January to October, 2020 to 2024. These are really dry signals here in the center part of the center part of the country. So if history has any bearing on that, that's why I can't walk away from, even just if the La Nina goes away, which it will late this winter, if the PDO is staying negative and it's strongly negative, that's not a great signal for moisture anywhere in the midsection of the country. Those numbers don't lie.
Does that tie into any of the heat units as well? You know,
Well,
if you look at 11 and 12 when that happened, it's pretty hot.
If it's this dry, it's gonna be hot, and especially the case. I know the past couple of Augusts have been really hot. Okay, we've had that late summer heat. So if that soil is dry, that's really with a lot of the folks that I work for back in October, I was telling them how important the weather pattern shift was from Halloween to Veterans Day. That 2 week period, being able to put as much water in the ground as possible and help to build that profile and cure some of that soil moisture was going to be really important because if we do have some dry time this winter and even in the spring, that subsoil moisture is going to be there to buy us some time. Okay, so that 2 week period was critical. I can't underscore that enough. Going forward, if we keep the PDO as negative as this is, as it is right now, you can see why history says that there could still be some problems in 25.
Okay. Another question was around NOAA, right? Being so aggressive towards the La Nina. I mean, what's your thoughts on why that's so much more aggressive than other parts of the country and some of the other people that read this information?
Because they're worse at it. And it's just the way it is. The BOM out of Australia, the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, and the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting are better at doing things like this than NOAA is. They put more research and development into it. They have done more pioneer research on this stuff. So whenever I see NOAA's model, and it has been way aggressive. You could even go back to these webinars that we've been doing, even since the spring of this year, they've been way overly aggressive, and the other models have been much more measured. So it's kind of a case study in showing why these other outlets are just better at this than NOAA is right now. I don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing NOAA. I'm just saying they are worse at it than these other people. There's still some things to learn there, especially with their modeling.
Gotcha. Alrighty, well, I think that's all I see from a question standpoint, but just a reminder, if you guys have additional questions around PRF and that program to contact us here at Producer Ag. And with that, thank you everybody and have a great Thanksgiving.
You guys too. Be well.